He wills that I should wholly be, in word, in thought, in deed, that I his holy face may see, when from this earth life freed. Words such as that they are, and they will, in the course of this lesson this morning, be very important. It's good to see everybody, and I mean that from the heart, as I know that this assembly, meaning all of you, as we come together on the first day of the week and focus our minds on those things that are of utmost importance, is what keeps my head above water the rest of the time. So I'm deeply appreciative of all of you and of the Lord and his wisdom. First for I think of the synagogue and the Jews coming together to hear the word read and to discuss it, and for us now to come together and focus our minds upon him and upon his word and his purpose for us in this world. Back in the book of Isaiah, chapter 30, we were working in last week. We talked about God as a teacher. And we spoke of him in our overarching theme that last Sunday as a faithful teacher. And of course, here in Isaiah 30, we have depicted for us people who God described as rebellious sons, and one of the characteristics is that they refused to listen to the instruction of the Lord. And as a result of that, because he loved them, remembering the Hebrew writer's words that whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. And so as a result of their refusal to listen to him and their unwillingness to listen, he gave them bread and water. Bread of oppression, water of affliction, to make them teachable. And someone has said a long time ago, yours truly, that God can teach a teachable person anything. But that willingness has to be there for us. It is that willingness to be taught that is of such importance. And as a result of his discipline, we found that although the Lord has given you bread of oppression and water of affliction, he, your teacher, will no longer hide himself. Some translations say your teachers, but I'm going with this one in the ESV. Your teacher will no longer hide himself, but your eyes will behold your teacher, and your ears will hear a word behind you saying, "This is the way. Walk in it." Keep that in mind for later. Yes, I do all I can to engage you in what's going on. So I want to go to the text then that we started with this morning from Isaiah chapter 6. And the reading, starts out saying, in the year of King Uzziah's death. And I wonder if there's not a very important connection that is being exposed here. Uzziah didn't die as soon as Isaiah began his ministry. But during that year, Uzziah died. Uzziah the king of Judah. Uzziah, who was or started out to be a very wonderful king. In fact, in 2 Chronicles 26, we read of him that he continued to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding through the vision of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, God prospered him. And he went on to talk about just how prosperous God had made him. And it was just a wonderful description. In Jerusalem, he made engines of war and skillful men and just a strong army, prosperous. Everything was going just great. But we're going to be talking this morning from the standpoint of the holiness of God. Now, Uzziah, when things were going really, really well, we're told in verse 15 that he was marvelously helped until he was strong. And when things were going really well, he is going to treat God as less than holy. He is so we don't do the same thing. Because when we go against, look, we can be out of our mind, right? Things are going so good, so well. I'm so irritated. You remember the story of Uzzah from 2 Samuel chapter 6. Uzzah, well, look, David wanted the Ark of the Covenant back. It had been in the house of, I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to say Aminadab, but look it up. It'll be something like that. And he had two sons, Uzzah and Ahio. And that ark had been in their home for a period of time. And David called for the Ark of the Covenant to be brought. And the record tells us they put it on a new cart. That's not how God said that ark was to be carried. That ark was to be carried by Levites, the sons of Kohath, and there were rings built into that ark through which poles were to be put, and the ark was to be carried on the shoulder by those poles. The ark was not to be touched. So they start right out, we're going to put it on a new cart now. Ahio and Uzzah had been in that household. That ark is sitting there. They probably got used to it, being around it, and they got a little loose. And the ark and the cart, the record says, began to stumble like it was going to fall. And Uzzah put out his hand and he touched the ark, trying to do a good thing. And he died right next to it. Why? Because he didn't treat God as holy. In a prayer of Moses in Psalm 90, part of that prayer, Moses said, "As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow. And soon it is gone, and we fly away." And then he asks, who understands the power of your anger and your fury according to the fear that is due you? Who understands He said, so teach us to Whoa. What did he say? Teach us. There's that faithful teacher. He ain't going away. He's there and he's here. So teach us to number our days. Today. Therefore, let us be careful how we walk, said the apostle. Not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time. Your 70 or 80, whatever you were going to get, give or take. Because the days are evil, so do not be foolish, but understand. Who understands? Prayed Moses. Understand what the will of the Lord is. And in understanding, then walk by it. God is awesomely and uniquely holy. A couple of young men who found that out were Nadab and Abihu. They were overzealous. You know, there was celebration going on. And they decided to offer incense to God at the wrong time. There's discussion about what exactly was their violation. We know in Leviticus 6:13 there was a fire that was built that was always to stay. We know that from chapter 16 there was an altar fire that had been lit there, and that altar fire was continually to burn. And when they took coals for incense, it was to come from that fire. But that rule hadn't been given yet. We're not sure. But in their overzealousness, they offered strange fire before the Lord. By those who come near me, this is what the Lord said, I will be treated as holy. That I should holy be, that I his holy face may see. I will be treated as holy. And before all the people, I will be honored. And Aaron, the father of those two boys, had nothing to say because he knew that was the case. And they violated that, and they didn't treat him as holy, and they died. What is the message? What's the message? You know, God called Israel out of Egypt. And he brought them to a land that they were to receive as an inheritance. He gave them, on the way to that land, he gave them a covenant. In Exodus 19 and verse 8, the people said to Moses, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. In chapter 24 and verse 3, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. In chapter 24, verse 7, Moses took the book of the covenant. The book of the covenant is Exodus 20, after the 10 commandments. The rest of that chapter through chapter 23, that's the book of the covenant. It expands upon and applies the principles of those 10 commandments. And Moses read the book of the covenant in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will be obedient. You ever started on an adventure, a job, whatever it is, and you got that beginner spirit? Man, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it right. Right here at the beginning. Boy, I'm setting my sights. I'm going to do it. You ever done that? Right? I mean, I told you before, man, every school year, it's like, all right, man, you got a new beginning. Going to go in there. We're just going to tear it up. Well, Moses ended up going up on the mountain, up on Mount Sinai, and disappeared into a cloud. 40 days and 40 nights. And you can read the account, and God has given him all kinds. He's telling him about the tabernacle and all kinds of different laws, and it came to pass that in Exodus 32, in verse 1, we find that the people assembled around Aaron. And they said, make us a God who will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. And he did so. And he made that golden calf. And the people got up and worshiped that calf. And God finally says to Moses in verse 8, he said, go down at once, for, I think this is interesting, your people. Now, how many times have we read, my people, my people, my people, my people, right? Yeah. You ever done that with your kids, your son, your daughter? Right? So your people who you brought up from the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from, listen, the way. You ever heard that term? That I commanded them. Now here's the problem. The issue is this: how can weak, sinful, corrupt people be at peace with this holy God and live in his presence? That was not only a question for them, it's the same question for you and me. How can we live in his presence, knowing what we in and of ourselves are? The book of Leviticus presents a statement by God over and over and over again. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. And he says in chapter 11 and verse 4, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Because God is holy, everything around him has to be holy. Nothing unholy, nothing unclean can come into his presence. You are barred, you are limited, you are excluded from his presence. So Israel also had to be holy to live in his presence. Sin had to be dealt with. And so once a year on the Day of Atonement, the high priest, of which Israel over their history had 81, and that high priest would enter into that most holy place. One of the messages that is given as he steps behind that curtain is, you can't come here. You don't have access. And we already know that somebody other than that high priest could not step behind that curtain without dying immediately. So sin had to be dealt with. And there were things that made the people unclean, which were not sin. Touching anything dead, a skin disease, giving birth, eating unclean foods, touching certain bodily fluids would render a person unclean, off limits. Now, let's make a bridge from here to the new covenant. In Isaiah chapter 35, Isaiah, as he looked forward to you and I, right here, he says, a highway will be there, a roadway. Remember in Acts, the way, people, the way, right? And it will be called the Highway of Holiness. The unclean will not travel on it. You hear? The unclean will not travel on it. But it will be for him who walks that way, and fools will not wander on it. So if you and I are going to live with God in peace in his presence, then we have to be clean. Now remember Leviticus, I am the Lord who sanctifies you. I can't do that for myself. I think of something that Jesus said to his disciples in John 15 and verse 3. He says, you are already clean because of the what? The word I spoke to you. Husbands, Paul said in Ephesians 5:26, love your wives, as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Why? Why do you do that? Remember, I'm the Lord who sanctifies you, that he might sanctify her. By the washing of water with the word, that he may present to himself the church in all her glory, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be what? Holy and blameless. As God intended for Israel, according to Exodus 19:6, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, so here on the highway of holiness, walk a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I want you to recall something that Paul said to the Ephesians as he referred to those Gentiles who had been brought in. He said, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but are fellow citizens with the saints, having been built upon the apostles and prophets. The foundation, of the apostles and prophets. That's why we start with the prophets, because there's the foundation, along with the apostles. Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, etc. So there's our foundation. And so now, since we have confidence to enter the holy place, we're the priests. We have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus. The writer says, let us draw near. Uzziah drew near. He died because he wasn't clean. He didn't treat God as holy. And all those examples, exactly as we have pointed out, exactly the same thing. But let us draw near with a sincere heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. You find back in Exodus chapter 24, as Aaron was being consecrated as high priest, they brought him out to the door of meeting and washed him with water. And so that washing, heart sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, in our bodies washed with pure water. Okay. I think this is a great quote for us to bring in. It is no exaggeration. This is from the ISB, International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. It is no exaggeration to state that this element of holiness overshadows all others in the character of deity as far as the Old Testament revelation is concerned. The lesser emphasis in the New Testament is readily accounted for on the assumption that the massive presentation under the Old Covenant is accepted as an underlying principle. Massive presentation of this holy God. And in the time that we have allotted, I was able only to throw out a few examples, but it's just massive. As we close, I'm going to take us over to Matthew chapter 27, verse 50, 2 verses. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. Back in Exodus chapter 26, verse 31, when Moses was receiving the instruction for the tabernacle, and in particular for the veil, God told him it is to be embroidered with cherubim. Who was it that guarded the entrance to Eden, so that no one could return and go back into that paradise of God? Who had the flaming swords to prevent anyone from entering the cherubim. On the day that Jesus cried out, the veil of the temple was torn in two, and the cherubim stepped aside. And access was granted. So that now we, with Jesus as our forerunner, are allowed, having been cleansed by his blood, to enter in to the most holy place, at peace with God, accepted in his presence. Our faithful teacher leads us in the way of hope, and he leads us in the way of holiness. Pursue peace with all men, said the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 12, and the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. Are you sufficiently impressed with the holiness of God? And with the fact, as Peter said in 1 Peter 1, like the Holy One who called you, you also be holy in all your behavior. That's what makes the difference. For it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. We hope that if you're hearing us this morning, that you will consider listening to the instruction of the Lord. He has many priests here who are willing, constantly preparing to be able to sit down with you and tell you what he has said so that you can decide to do it or to set it aside. But give yourself the opportunity to make an intelligent decision as together we stand and sing our song of invitation.